Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3, page. We finished page 1238. We're up to the top of page 1239, new paragraph. So what did we learn? We learned that just as in the Ratzon HaTachten, a Ratzon that's driven by Tam V'das, by rational reasoning, that just as there you have different levels, like we said, the level of where the seichel intelligence is radiating and vitalizing and creating a dynamic, passionate desire, and you have a state where the seichel recedes, and the only thing that remains is the metzach, the level of metzach, which is the determination and the commitment. So same thing, he says, in the Ratzon Elyon, there's also bedugma. It has moichin, midas, and metzach. But he didn't explain metzach, that we're going to learn about now. So he explained, first of all, the moichin and midas. That there's midas there, but the midas are like dark hills, like dark mountains, because they're still concealed within the desire. It's like the emotions within the desire that are concealed and also in a state of unlimited element to them, because they're not structured yet in a defined, structured way as they are in the conscious faculties when the midas in Zah are defined. So they're also not defined in that way. So he says, Amidas al pihatam, they're called Tura de Nehura. They're called illuminated or bright mountains or hills. And this is called Tura de Chashecha. Tura Chashecha. And this is, there's no limit because they're not in Eris and Kalim. It's like Ava Rabba. Yeah. And it's on the level of Ratzon, and Ratzon in general is in a state of concealment and unlimited because it's behind the scenes. Yada Gdele, Yada Chazaka. And just as there's Midas, there's also, in the Midas of the Ratzon, there's also a source that gives birth to them, as it is in Ratzon HaTachten. And that's Chabad Sheberatzon. So the Chagaz, the Midas Sheberatzon, are come from the Chabad Sheberatzon, which is called the concealed or the hidden or covered reason. It's not a revealed logic, but there is some tam there. He calls it Shaloyesh Tam Nigla, which is tam b'seichel mamish. Tam komus l'ratzon, it's not seichel mamish, but it's still a tam b'tainux. There's something that's driving the desire. So in other words, there is a higher, let's call it supraconscious logic going on, but it's not logic as we understand it. Like he said, that's why it doesn't limit the midas. It's like chakim b'lei b'chochmi yediyah, bina b'lei b'bina yediyah. So it's essentially a superconscious level of intelligence that's a source that gives birth to the emotions within the Ratzon, all inside the level of the desire. As I explained yesterday more at length what that means in the level of Keser. Now he's going to continue and talk about, what about Metzach, the Heskem? Just as we said in Ratzon HaTachten, we say when the Seichel is not revealed, like after davening, but still there's a trace that remains of the actual determination of the Ratzon. So Ratzon has two sides to it. There's what vitalizes it and gives it deeper passion, deeper energy, if you wish. And then there's the very thing that he wants it, and that's that. I think a good way to introduce the next section and also help explain what we just learned, think of it this way. I'm going to speak an example of an avodah. You can do mitzvahs, like he said, after davening, just out of Kabbalah sale. What does that mean? You've decided that you're going to follow what God wants. You don't understand it necessarily, you don't feel it, but you're doing it. It's similar to what we learned from Perek Tazayin and Tanya, that Kachi Yosa, that it's fitting, it's appropriate, it's nice. Your mind and emotions told you it's a good thing to do. But it's not that you're driven with the full passion and all the giluyim that come. It's doing more, it's driven mostly by Kabbalah sale, like a servant who's committed to his master. Whatever you tell me to do, I will do, whether I understand or I don't understand. The positive side of that is that it's very determined. It's a real commitment. It's like the pawns on the chessboard, as the Rebbe explains, the foot soldiers. They don't understand all the strategies of the commander-in-chief and all the details, and don't have necessarily all the passions and emotions of higher level oivdim, people who are serving God. But they do one thing, is they follow orders. They follow orders. And in many ways, that has a mila, because they don't question. And they're not that smart to say that, you know what, I'm a partner in the strategy. They follow orders. What's the downside? The downside, it doesn't permeate the full person. When your mind and emotions are not completely engaged, so you're doing it mechanically more. So yes, there's a very strong commitment, that's correct. But the Eibishter wants also the Giluyim that should fill our personalities. Because the things that you do that you're excited about, that you're passionate, that you appreciate with your intelligence and your heart, you're going to be far more involved in it. Now, this doesn't say this commitment is wavering. We actually said it's unwavering, because it's not because of reason. But imagine if you could have both, the best of both worlds. Total commitment, but also one that fills you up and stimulates your mind and your emotions, and your full being is involved in it. That's ultimately the kavanah. The first can be more etzem, like you said, from the etzem hanefesh, this type of commitment, and that's that. The second is more the personality. But if you have both, you have the best of both. You have the etzem and the giluyim, so to speak. Etzem as in the commitment. But when the Eibishter created the world, he knew that we can't reach both levels at one shot. This is a process of growth. When you teach children, for example, to wash negelvasser, or to say moda'ani, or to make a bracha, or to be nice, you're not expecting them to fully understand it. At this point, you're teaching them manners. You're teaching them behavioral things. Like we learned, mutfa. Do it, their natural behavioral thing. You're training them. As they grow, you want them to understand it. You want them to feel it. You want them to own it, not just because they were commanded to do so. Someone who grows up and is only doing it because they were told to do so, and they never really internalized and owned it, it could also disappear. Or it could stay with them, but it never really engages and excites them. So you want to have both. So the way the Eibishter created the world is in the same way. In the Lamaila, by the Eibishter, he knows exactly when he has the desire to create existence. It's not just I want it. It comes with Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, and like he says here, a Tam Komos. There is a reason. There's a tainug behind the scenes. But then, and there's a Chabad, and there's a midas in it. In other words, there's even on the Rotzen level, it has these elements, but they're concealed and they're unlimited. Now we're going to understand that in the Rotzen, you could also have a state where we only know what God wants, but we don't know the logic behind it. And that's going to be the Heskem, the Metzach of Arich Ampin. The Metzach of Zah, if you recall, that was the determination that remains when the Seichel is no longer, you forget the logic and the feelings behind it. So all you have is the determination that you made. And there's dinim and gvuras, because Zah, without moichin, is very raw. It has a lot of edges. It's rough on the edges, so to speak, as we said. And like a child, it's mole din and v'gvuras. It's filled with judgments and the severities. Now we're going to learn about another level of determination, but it's a higher level. That all we know is that God wants it. We don't know the reasoning and the tam komus, like he just said, behind it. The Chabad and the Chagas that we just learned about in Rotzen is concealed, and all you have is the Metzach. But this is going to be the Metzach now, the Mitzcha of Arich, and I think also Atik ultimately. So now it's going to continue the explanation of the Zohar, if you remember, that the Zivug Shalom, the complete union, is when Chochma and Bina, Abba V'Ima are mistakel, where at the Metzach of Arich Ampin. And from there they receive the 370 lights. Then he continued that the Metzach of Atik addition is called Rotzen. And now we're going to see how the Zohar comes alive through Chassidus, the explanation of Chassidus Chabad. And that ultimately in Eis Rotzen, Raiva Deraivan, that level will shine even into Zah and as such silence the severity, so it'll elevate Zah, even the Midas in the world of Midas, not the world of Ratzon. The Midas in the Ratzon, ultimately the Metzach of the Ratzon, which means just the determination, will ultimately impact the emotions and silence and quiet and subdue or sublimate the severities. That's where we're going right now. So everything is coming together now. Now we're talking about on the Ratzon Elyon level. So basically, Metzach of Zah is the Ratzon HaTachten, and is the determination of the Ratzon HaTachten that's driven by Seichel, but the Seichel is silenced. Now we're talking the level of Ratzon Elyon that's higher than Seichel, but also has within it Chabad Chagaz, but in a concealed fashion. And now we're going to talk about the Metzach of this level of Ratzon Elyon. Okay. So we'll run inside, top of page 1239. And you can find it at ayinbeis.com. I just want to say that the next pages, just as the last few pages, are quite dense. They're very hard to understand on your own because they're very compact. You need a lot of unpacking, which I'm hoping to do and I'm trying to do. But on their own, someone just wrote to me, someone who listens, I guess, to the YouTube, that they're really appreciative of this class because for the first time understand level these ideas that usually you just skip over because they're just too Kabbalistic. But the truth is when you really analyze it, you see how relevant it is as well. So page 1239. And now, the last paragraph addressed the Chabad and the Chagas in the higher Ratzon that's higher, the super rational Ratzon, supraconscious Ratzon, has also those components, just like the conscious Ratzon has, the rational desire has. So now the Heskem, the Metzach, just as there's Metzach, so just as in Ratzon HaTachten there's the Heskem, the determination or the commitment. V'hu, as we said, Shenesalam Atam, V'nisha Raka Ratzon. The reason behind the desire has been concealed. All that's left is the desire itself. In other words, the will, the commitment, the absolute desire to commit it to it. He says, "Kamoi kain b'Ratzon Elyon." Yesh gam kein b'chinas ha'heskem. In Ratzon Elyon, there's also a level where you have the main focus is on the determination, on the commitment itself. For who? And I said this already yesterday, but I see he's bringing it in here. This is the story when Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, when he saw how Rabbi Akiva and the other 9 martyrs were being brutally killed. He's still going to mention Rabbi Akiva. They took an iron comb and they peeled off his skin. He's going to mention this. That's why I'm mentioning it. So Moshe says, Zu Torah v'zu schara. This is Torah and this is its reward. What's? And the Eibishter answer, Shteik, be silent, be quiet. Kach ola b'machshava lefanai. That's what arose in my thought before me, in my internal thought. And what does that mean? So he says, this is a level for who shanelim hatam legamri. This is not a reason. He's just saying, this is what I want. This is what my thought dictates. Completely nelam hatam legamri. Uba b'chinas rotzon poshet. And all that it is, this is what God wants. A shapeless, seamless desire without any reason. Rotzon poshet legamri. She'ein lo tam klal. There's no reason. What kind of reason could there be that God would want such a thing? So he says, V'harizeh, inyan a heskem. This is the meaning of a heskem, that there's no revealed reason here at all. This is a determination. He's determined to be this way. This is what God, like when we say it in the Asar Gemachas, they send up the Ish Levush Abad, they send up a shliach. Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol goes up and purifies himself. V'tir Rabbi Shmuel Atzmei. He goes up to find out, is it correct? Should they essentially subject themselves to the decree of the cruel Roman emperor? And he meets the Levush Abad, Ish Levush Abadim, the man in white garments of linen. And he says to him, Kablu Aleichem, I heard from behind the curtain, Shamaiti Macher, that this is the Gzeira above, This is a decree, a heavenly decree, so accept it. So that alone tells you, that's a decree, that's Heskem. A determination, and that means shekach huskam v'huchlet bli shum tam. That's how it was determined, and that's how it was decided, without any reason. However, as he's going to explain, this doesn't mean there is nothing behind it. So what he's established now, that there's a level of Heskem in this highest level of Ratzon Elyon. Okay, which is going to be called Metzach soon, the Metzach of Arich Ampin, which conceals the Chabad, the Seichel within it. But now he continues. Now it's known, in this inyan, as it's explained, be silent, because this is what rose in my thought. This is not just some stubborn statement God is making. He's saying, this is Torah and this is its reward. And God says, no, this is what I want. Like some stubbornness. God forbid, how could you say that? There is a reason. There is a reason behind it. However, it's concealed to the extent that you cannot in any way, klal reveal it. Because it does not manifest in seichel that we can relate to. Ad shahizgalus siyarotzen, to the extent that all you can see and all that is revealed is the very desire, the very decree. Kamoishahu blishum tam lagamni, the rotzen in its pure form, without any reason at all. So in other words, there's times that, he's going to explain this, but let me just make it clear right now. There are things that you do, and right away everyone understands the reason. Someone, let's say, is doing a good act, and God blesses him and gives him a gift. No one needs to understand. It's very clear. He did a good thing. There's a good reason. The reason dictated that the Ratzon Elyon should be bless this person. You did good things. There's a reason. There's a Ratzon. Everything is clear. A second scenario is that God does something. You don't see the immediate reason, but when you think about it, or in time, you suddenly realize, oh, now I understand why it was done this way. Even though at the time I didn't see. So the tam is concealed, but not completely concealed. And then there's a situation like we're talking here, where the act is completely horrendous. It would seem opposite of anything that makes zu teira, zu schara. This is teira, this is its reward. Not only you're not rewarding them, you're punishing them in this horrible way. So here, it's not like a reason that you just are not smart enough to understand. And tomorrow you'll learn, or on time. Here, it's so beyond that the only thing that is revealed to us, even though there is something for the Eibishter's plan, he has his reasons, but the reason is so beyond that the only thing we have is Ratzon, and there's no gili klal or klal. So nelam kol chach sheish ashes gal Ratzon k'moshe bli shum tam legamri. Not just a reason to say, you know what, I don't understand it. Let me struggle a little more. Let me study. Let me go to smarter people. Fundamentally, the whole act is so opposite of anything that is rational, even though there's a tam, but the tam is completely concealed. So all you have is a decree, the godly divine decree. You could obviously apply this also to the Holocaust, even though obviously the Maimer doesn't do that. This is before the Holocaust happened. But regardless, that type of event, yeah. Now he's going to explain what this means. So all this is explaining Metzach of Arich Ampin, that Arich Ampin has a Ratzon part, that though there's something behind the forehead, reasoning or tam, yet at this point where we are, it's all you see is the gzeira, the decree. Now he's using a very extreme example here, and a decree which is a horrible decree, obviously, horrible events that happen. But it could be that he's using that because that drives the point home to the extent of that we don't understand. So now he's going to explain it by going back to a theme that some of you may remember from volume 1, the 2 levels of Chochma Stim'aah, of the superconscious intelligence, that there's 2 levels. One that is hidden but it's close to being revealed, which means where it's accessible. Like I said, it's a reason, you just don't know the reason right now. And the other is a fundamentally beyond us, completely beyond our type of logic and reasoning. But before I continue, let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything about what we just learned. Okay. So he says now, Inyan who, the Inyan of this is like this. Just I want to add one more thing, just so we shouldn't lose the plot. Remember, all this is coming to explain the progression of how we grow and connect with godliness. From our natural behavioral, mutfa, to the emotional, to the cognitive emotional, to the cognitive, to the inner cognitive bina, and then chochma, where you get absorbed in a higher reality. And now we're talking about chochma bina as they connect to rotzen, and they connect to the metzach in their zivuk shalom, to these higher levels of experience. So in truth is, if you think about it, step back, this is the map of Ayin Beis, the interface from the lowest level of our existence, from our beginning when we were born, state of ibur, pregnancy, and mutfa, natural, all the way as we grow to the highest levels of experiencing the divine. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. So it's not just like going off in some tangent here. It's part of a bigger picture, but in the classic style of Ayin Beis, it's developed into a lot of details and a whole story, narrative as we're learning it. So that we will get back to all of that, and I'll make sure to connect it back. So don't worry, we're not going to be lost in the woods here. Even though right now he's deeply immersed in understanding this level of metzach, this level of determination. In a way, this is God on God's terms, because we don't understand it. Even though there is a tam behind the scenes, we are now essentially accepting the Ratzon, and that's how it is. Just like in the Ratzon HaTach, now it's in the Ratzon HaElyon. I was also just thinking, when I mentioned Ratzon HaTach and Ratzon HaElyon, initially it sounded like that we too have two levels of Ratzon. We have a Ratzon that's driven by reason. We have a Ratzon that's just part of the Etzem HaNefesh. And that's correct. He said that very clearly on page 1237. It's at Etzem HaNefesh. But now it's very clear that the Ratzon HaElyon, you're also talking about God's Ratzon HaElyon now. So there's probably in godliness, there's also the Ratzon HaTachten, the God's Ratzon as it manifests in reason and the levels, and there's the God's Ratzon as it's higher than reason. Just wanted to point that out because it seems like he's talking on both tracks. Okay, so he says like this, Va'inyan hu, the Inyan is, commotion is barely ill. So he's referring us back to Dibra Maschal Shira Hamayla Sanal, the Dibra Maschal Oisus Sukase. So we're going back to Tofresh Ayin Dalet, volume 1. It says page 399 and on. So what did we learn there? It was very, very fundamental piece in the interface between Keser and between the Reimamus, between the transcendent and the immanent, between Mamakif and Pnimi, between the divine transcendent and the immanent existence. So he said, we learn like this. Sheyesh beis madregas b'chochma Stim'aah. The two levels in the hidden wisdom. Let me explain. Chochma Stim'aah is, we'll call it supraconscious intelligence. Chochma Gluya is when you're aware that you have a flash and a spark of an idea. There's awareness. It's not beyond consciousness. It's a very conscious experience. However, it's just the beginning, is the seed of consciousness that's planted in our conscious minds. And we spoke about what that is. Hanocha sichlis, resonance, that the nekuda pnimis, the inner point, the purpose of it all, the riyah, the visualization, the clarity. That will then develop in bina, like father and mother. The seed will then gestate, and develop into a fetus, into a child, and will give birth to midas. But behind the scenes, behind the curtain of consciousness, where did that spark come from? The spark and flash of an idea. So psychology may call it the collective unconscious, the subconscious. We'll call it the supraconscious because it's higher. On the other side of the curtain that we cannot see is the level of Keser, or we're talking about the intelligence within Keser. So we're talking about in supraconscious intelligence. Before it's streamed, like through a faucet, the drops of Chochma, what's behind the faucet is the reservoir of supraconsciousness. That is called in Kabbalah Chochma Stim'aah, the root and source of Chochma Gluya. So Chochma Stim'aah is behind the curtain, Chochma Gluya is what emerges, the drops that emerges into our consciousness. Sometimes there's an expression in Chassidus called Koyach HaMaskil, the power to conceive. That's associated with this power of Chochma Stim'aah, at least the lower level of it, which is the power to conceive of all ideas. The Koyach HaMaskil will then manifest in a particular seichel, a particular idea. Okay. Now, this isn't just a quantitative difference. Like in a reservoir in a faucet, it's very straight. You have a pool of water, a reservoir of water. It is pumped and travels through water mains, arteries that come to the different cities, that each artery goes into the main. The mains then travel through pipes into each home. Those pipes end up being your water supply. So basically, it's all the same water. It's just channeling it all. Here, we're not talking about the same. What's in the supraconscious is not just a reservoir of the same water. It's obviously in a different level altogether, because that's why it's called supraconscious. It's not yet shaped. Even Chochma, we said, was fluid and can go in Chesed and Gvura, where Bina gets solidified, and then it becomes a solid motion, Chesed or Gvura. Here in supraconscious, it's even higher than that. But I don't want to go so much into that, just wanted to make that point. So now we're going to learn, as he's citing that which we learned in volume 1, that in Chochma Stim'aah itself, there are 2 levels. In this supraconscious, there are 2 levels. The chinas chitzenius ha-chochma, the outer dimension of this chochma, shebebchinas moker le-chochma d'Atzilus, which is a state of a source for the Chochma of Atzilus. Chochma of Atzilus would be conscious Chochma of Atzilus. In other words, the sphere of Chochma, Bina Das, the first of the 10 spheres. Its source is the chitzenius of Chochma Stim'aah, which is the Mokel Chochma d'Atzilus, Ubchinas Pnimius HaChochma. And then there's an inner dimension of the supraconscious Chochma. She'ein Ubchinas Moker Klal. That's not even a state that you can call a source. Okay. So you can explain what this means. This means the b'chinas chitzenius chochma stim'aah, the outer dimension of supraconscious chochma, or concealed chochma stim'aah, as in concealed or sealed. Hurak shalamayla misechel. That only saying that it's higher than intelligence as we know it. U'makom mokom efes kitseyu boli de gili. And nevertheless, an edge of it, efes kitseyu, just a small edge, a mere edge of it does come, a speck of it does come in a state of gili. In other words, it's not completely removed. The yesh bezeh, and within this itself, yesh bezeh madregas gavoyas. In it itself, there are very high levels. Ukmei omuk omuk. Like it says, omuk momuk machshavesecha, omuk momuk, as he explains there's deeper and deeper. Ukmei shenema sham. Ukmei is boyer sham, rather. As it was explained there in the Maimorim he just referred to in Tafresh Ayin Dal, Shir Amailis and Kosei. But when you talk about the inner dimension of supraconscious wisdom, it's completely not in domain of revelation at all on its own. Like when he says, that you sealed and closed this matter. In other words, it's completely sealed away. It's inaccessible. So the lower level of superconscious is accessible to some extent. This higher level is completely inaccessible. Now we learned back then, just to clarify a bit.
That's in Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah, the Ketz. Yeah. Okay. Now we learned earlier, just to give a little more explanation of these two levels. I mentioned before, there can be, right now, you may not know, like let's say you tell someone, a student of yours or a child of yours, to do something. And they say, what's the reason? You say, there's a reason. When you get a little older, you'll understand. And they get a little older, or in time, they come to understand. So there is a reason. The reason was accessible, except for right now, it was concealed. When you talk about b'sosem be'etzem, that's what he speaks about there. There is fundamentally not something that you can access. It's not a chochma that's in any form that you can relate to. You know, we used the example a little of quantum mechanics and physics, that there's things that are, the uncertainty is not because we don't know. There are things we don't know. So meanwhile, right now, it's unclear. It's unknowable. But there are things that are fundamentally uncertain, no matter, it's not because we have lack of instruments or data, but they're fundamentally in a state that is not yet defined. Just an example, it's not exactly this, but that's it. So there's two different levels of Chochma Stim'aah. Now this Pnimius Chochma Stim'aah is going to give it a name, which is going to be relevant to the Zohar we're learning. And he says, V'hu b'chinas Chochma Stim'aah ilah da'atika. The lower level of Chochma Stim'aah relates more to Arich Ampin. This Pnimius Chochma Stim'aah is called Chochma Stim'aah ilah, the higher concealed or superconscious Chochma of Atik. Okay, so far we've established two levels in this superconsciousness. If you want more on this, more information on this, more learning, he says clearly where to look in volume 1. In his Boyer Gamkein, the Rabbi is summing up. It was also explained, and he gives us again the Mokar. This is the third time he refers to this mimer, B'dibra Maschel Tiku Hanal, which is a mimer before the previous two mimarim. The mimer of Tiku of Rosh Hashanah of that year, Tafrei Shayin Daled, was also explained the following. The Midas Sheberotzen, remember we learned there's Midas Sheberotzen called the dark hills or the dark mountains. Ubchinas Tam Komus, and the Tam Komus and the concealed reason behind those Midas. Remember we said there's a concealed reason, it's not pure seichel, but there is a certain element of reason. Zeu Mokr L'Esus Datzilus. This is the source in Keser, in Arich, to the 10 spheres of Atzilus. So he's going to say that this level of Tam Komos and Midas Sheberotzen, Imkein Hari Madrega Zu, so that based on that, this level, Yesh Lezek Tzaz Gili Al Kaponim L'Natzolim. It has some measure of revelation, at least, to the emanations. In other words, it's a lower level of Chochma Stim'aah. So that what we learned before about the Midas and the Seichel in Ratzon has some connection to the emanations. Like you said, the Seichel has something, so it's accessible to some extent. For who? And what does that mean? Shezehu b'bchinas mokir al kaponim l'netzolim. That this level of Midas Sheberotzen and the Tam Komas, the concealed reason behind it, is at least a source to the emanations. The Einu b'chinas mokir harochik. And it's not like a distant source. Because you feel at least that it exists. What he means by that is that when an idea comes into your mind, number one, even though you don't know where it came from, but you feel it came from somewhere. More importantly, what he means here is that even if you don't know the reason, but you know there is a reason, and you can relate to that, and at some point you'll have the reason. Okay. And additionally, just to clarify, let me just explain. He wants to come away with saying that there's going to be a level where the tam komos is so removed that there's no reason at all. Here, at least we're talking about a reason that we don't know yet, or we can sense something is there, but there's going to be a state where it's complete metzach, where there's nothing, where it's only determination at all. But he's talking about two levels now. So just keep that in mind. He didn't finish it yet, so we're not sure. I'm not sure how it's going to all play itself out, but that's what he's talking about now. So he's continuing this discussion of this higher level that is we can have some access to it, even though it's removed from us. So he calls it a mocker and not a distant mocker. Additionally, another thing, the gam, an additional point in the relationship between this lower level of superconscious wisdom and consciousness, the gam yesh gilim mizeh. There's also a revelation that comes from this level, like when you see the flow of deep ideas. I'll explain this. Let me just read the line. I'll explain. Like a chacham, due to his very power of his brain power, his very core power. So you see, like a mayan hamizgaber, a flowing and intensely flowing wellspring that doesn't stop. It just all these deeper ideas are flowing out of him. And look earlier in the Maimer Vayakel. Below they say maybe it's a different Maimer. So let me explain. There's a story, I think they say with the Mittler Rebbe, or the Maggid, the Mittler Rebbe, where middle of teaching, middle of speaking, he would say, shah still.
The Mittler Rebbe.
Yeah. He says, shah still, be quiet. And it was explained, who was he talking to? He was talking to himself, because the flow, once the channels opened, it was coming so quickly and so intensely, he was trying to like quiet down or slow down, to lower the volume, so to speak, of that flow. What he's saying is like this, that in the regular situation, you have a drop of an idea, it comes into your mind. Okay. Now you can have many ideas coming into your mind, but there's some, and it's coming from what? From the supraconscious, Chochma Stim'aah, the lower level, that you don't have access to directly, but you can't say there's no relationship at all. There's a relationship. One is behind the curtain, and one is on this side of the curtain. But he said, and therefore he says it's a mocker, not a mocker rachik, because you can sense something. Then now he's saying even furthermore, not only you sense something, you actually have a flow. Because there's a connection between them, there are times where that channel opens up and you see an aviyas hamechin. I remember many times by Fabrengen, certain times the Rebbe opened like that and suddenly started flowing. Like it's hard to keep up. You could just see that one idea leads to another idea, to another idea, another idea. That's why it says, like by a chacham, it's at etzem koyach chochmase. So most people, you have a flow that's more gauged, that's more measured, that's more regulated. But then there can be a flow of this nature that just, so you see that the Chochma Stim'aah is speaking to the Chochma Gluya in a very open way. Now, it's still Chochma Stim'aah, it's still coming from a place that's beyond us, but there's a close relationship. So in addition to what he said before, that you margish es mitziyuse, and there's a tam komus, and there's some saz gili, now he's added, there's even this gili of chinas nevias sichlim amukim, deep ideas that are just flowing from that superconscious state. So that's the first level. That's Chochma Stim'aah, the Chitzenius Chochma Stim'aah. Now he's going to go to Pnimius Chochma Stim'aah. However, well, let me stop here. Anybody want to ask anything about this? He's now going to go to the deeper level. Any questions? However, or by contrast, Inyan Shtei Kachola, going back to the story, the Shtei, where God says silent. That's what arose. We said Machshavti, that's what arose by him. Hu she'ena begeded Gili ben Etzalim. This is completely not in the domain of Gili in the emanations. Before we said Ksaz Gilui, something you sense. Nevias Sichli Mamukim, there's a flow. Here we're talking about something that's completely inaccessible. Tos, to the Netzolim. The Zeu Sheshol Moshe, and this goes back now to the story. And this is what Moshe asked. He asked Hashem, what's Moshe? Moshe is the level, B'chinas Chochma Elah D'Atzilus. Moshe is revealed Chochma, the first level of Atzilus, Chochma Elah, Chochma Gluya. And what is this Moshe? What is Chochma Elah asking? The Chizut Teira V'Zu Schara. When he saw how Rabbi Akiva and the others were barbarically being tortured and killed. And this is Teira, and this is its reward. Chochma Elah is asking this question. That means Chochma Elah does not have a way of wrapping its head around. It's completely unfathomable. Such a behavior, such action doesn't have any mokum klal klal. It just reminds me of those sikhs when the Rebbe would cry about Golas. There's absolutely no logical reason. There's no mokum klal klal from the level of Chochma Gluya. That's why Moshe asked the question. Moshe was a smart man. He was a holy man. He was a godly man. He didn't understand that there's maybe a deeper reason. He said, this is Torah and this is reward. In other words, he's completely shocked. Such behavior, because in Chochma Gluya, such a tragedy, such barbaric behavior, it has no room. Ein mokum, again, ein lezem mokum klal l'klal b'chochma gluya. So it's not like Chochma Stim'aah that we can relate to. Maybe we don't understand completely. At least we get a glimpse, a little more, less. Here, the whole thing is off, completely unfathomable. And the Rebbe Rashab qualifies. Umashuhu b'chinas tam komos. And that which we said that it's a tam komos, there is a concealed reason that only God knows, al koponim. Ein shayach lama sheyi adova mufrach lagamri. Shari neide mitziyus al koponim. The level of a tam komos, that there is a concealed reason, he says, then you can't say the dover is mufrach lagamri. By Moshe and Chochma Elah, the complete thing on a mufrach lagamri means completely unfathomable, completely more than unfathomable. It's mufrach, completely impossible to understand such a thing. If it was tam komos, meaning like the lower level, I guess that's what he's saying, because there at least you may not know the reason, but you know that there may be a reason or there is a reason. This type of reaction means it's completely unfathomable, completely doesn't make any sense. And he gives an example for the lower case, where there's a tam komos. It would be like somebody who may not understand the depth of something, but knows there's something deep here. We have this all the time. You learn something. You may not understand its depth, but you know at least the existence, there's something going on here. Here, the whole thing is opposite of any logic, any reasoning. For something to be completely abgefrekt, how do you say in English abgefrekt? Completely unacceptable, completely unfathomable, impossible, mufrach.
Incomprehensible?
Uncalled for?
No. No, it's not bilti musig. Bilti mufrach means it's impossible, basically. She'ein lezeh mokim klal. For something to be mufrach legami, completely impossible, that doesn't have any room at all, that's an indication That the reason there is even higher than a tam komas, than a concealed reason. So when we say concealed reason, we at least say there's a reason, but it's concealed. I don't know it. Here, we're saying more than that. Not only I don't know it, what's happening here is exactly opposite of anything that's acceptable in any form of reason. It says mufrach legamri. And in the Rebbe Rashab's parentheses, this, by the way, I remember in volume 2, almost word for word. It's a very painful parentheses, but this is what he says. Because in truth, when you think about it, what pleasure could there be by God? That they peeled off, they peeled away the skin.
The comb.
Yeah, I said before, iron comb. I'm in the middle of teaching it. I know what I'm saying. Don't worry. That they peeled away the skin of Rabbi Akiva with an iron comb. The nimcherab sare b'mekelim, and they sold his flesh in the marketplace, like feeding it to the dogs. What kind of pleasure could there be in something like this? This is not something where you say, you know what, it's a deep reason, I don't understand, it's beyond me. What kind of pleasure could there be? How does it enig nelam b'yeser l'maylo m'maylam b'chinas tam komos? This is an enig nelam b'yeser. I mean, he uses the word enig, but it basically means a reason or a pleasure that is completely concealed, higher and higher than any concealed reason. It's completely beyond us. Yeah. V'hainu, and this is the level of b'chinas primius Chochma Stim'aah, the inner dimension of the supraconscious Chochma, b'chinas Chochma da'atika, the Chochma of Atik. She'i efshel izgalis klal, that is impossible to reveal at all. U'bo rak b'chinas rotzen poshet levad. The only thing that emerges is the actual will, desire, decree. The shapeless rotzen that does not have any way that you can explain it or understand it. V'atam nelam legamri, and the reason behind it is completely concealed. Rak harotzen, the only thing that's revealed is the desire itself. Shekach huritzene is barach. This is what God wants. This is God's will. For who inyan aheskem, this is the determination. Shekach huskem v'huchlet, so was decreed, so was determined, so was decided. Al pi hatam va'enig hayedua, rak elov yizbarach. According to a reason and a pleasure that's known only to God, the nelamhu me'en kol chai, and it's concealed from the eyes of every creature, every living entity. Gam b'chinas chochmei law d'atzilis, hidden also from chochmei law of Atzilis, Moshe Rabbeinu. This is a very heavy piece here we learned here, very heavy. And then he adds, "Va'agili b'zeh." And what then is it? What revelation is there? A revelation here? Is that it says it's a revelation, but it's a revelation of what he calls Husha Atzmi Mizgala. That the Etzem was revealed, meaning no Giluim. There's no revelation in any reason or rhyme or explanation or feeling anything. It's the Atzmi Mizgala, and he compares it as a Komei Matan B'Seiser. It's like when you get a gift, an anonymous gift. So you don't know where it's coming from. You just know it's a gift, but you have no idea. U'kamoishin is barley, like we learned earlier, that it's coming from a place that's completely beyond any type of awareness, revelation, connection, source. That's how we teach Matan B'Seiser. I mean, usually Matan B'Seiser, someone gives a gift and it's anonymous. But Matan B'Seiser here is Seiser like an Atik, the higher level of Chochma Stim'aah, that is completely beyond and concealed. So all you have is the etzem was nizgal, God's will, which defies all reason and beyond anything. That emerged, but not in a way that we can relate to in our terms, through our logic, or through our emotion. So just that's God's decree. So is there a mile in it? Not the tragedy, obviously. The mile is that that's what God wanted. So that was revealed. But, I think I'm going to stop here. Let me stop if there's any questions. So this has really moved into a very, the big question, why the tragedies happen and why the good people suffer. And
why the good things happen.
This is this reward that even Moshe. So he's using this as the premise of Chochma Stim'aah, the deepest levels. Okay, the next section he's going to explain now is going to bring it back to Arich and Atik, that these are the two levels of Chochma Stim'aah. So it's the two levels of Metzach. The Metzach is a Heskim, but one where there's more Seichel in it, and one where there is Seichel, but it's not revealed, and then one that's completely removed. That's where he's going to go from here. Anybody want to ask anything, to clarify anything?
This is the word. This is what the word Kodesh means. It's separate.
Yeah. Very intense piece. Very humbling.
Rabbi Jacobson?
Yeah.
One mashal that I learned when they was talking about this very story of Rabbi Akiva, it was saying about the whole the king that basically hires somebody who makes the best outfit out of the best fabric, and then his aides come to him and say, "Well, this guy stole a whole bunch of fabric and you don't even know it." So when the king accuses the guy who sewed the piece together, he basically undoes everything to show the king that not in a single piece was stolen, everything was used. So when it comes to this, when it says Hashem says I'm gonna turn the world into tohu va'ohu, is basically saying that if you really want to know to understand the reason, I have to go all the way back to the beginning, just like the dismantling of the fabric, to show you exactly why this has happened.
Well, I would say I know that example very well. I use it often. This is even deeper than that example. That example, you can actually explain it. You could actually go and discover the reason by unraveling it all. Here he's saying that there's no way you could ever get it because it's beyond us altogether. Okay. There you could say there's a reason. Here he's saying it's completely in a different realm. But I hear what you're saying. Okay, thank you. It's a longer discussion. I don't want to go now into all the different ways we explain horrific events in this context. He's not trying to explain, by the way, why God does it. Just kind of say that this thing is completely beyond explanation. That's why the approach is with silence. You have nothing else shtick. There's nothing else you can say. There's no words. That's really what it comes down to. Any other questions? Anybody wants to ask anything else or comment?
Rabbi, when you gave a vort, when there was the tragedy by the kever of the Rashbi, Meron, yeah. And you talked about this a little bit. You didn't talk about it explicitly because it was a more general audience. But I think you said, I apologize if I got it wrong. You said what you said just now, that there's nothing you can say. The response is silence. You did say that. But you also said something, and here I may not get it right, but you said something like, God himself doesn't exactly know why. Of course, it was something like you said like that. He's to some extent stupefied himself, if you will, although it's of course him and he's in control of it. Do you recall saying something like that?
What I said was like the level of Reisha Deloy Yada, that there's a level that is not God is stupefied. It's that God, it's beyond the rational. There's places where God, consciousness itself is a level, a lower level. There are things that happen that are higher than state of conscious wisdom and intelligence. That's what I was referring to. That God himself is like, it's coming from a place that's beyond the rational. In the context of what we're learning here is that even when we say here, God knows the reason, but this reason is clearly not in the realm of reason as we understand reason. So in a way, if you're talking about God as he relates to our form of reason, it's beyond his reason too. But on the other hand, in God's realm, there is something going on that is only godly type of awareness. So we learned about this in volume 2, where we talked about there's the stage where God becomes aware of his own will. And there's a level he's not aware, not because he's unaware, because it's higher than awareness. That's what I was referring to.
And that's this level here that we just read about, yes?
That may be one way to explain it, because you could say it's that the reason, as we understand the reason, das Tachten, God also is it's beyond das Tachten, but you could say that there's a level where God is aware. He does say that, but only he knows it. So there's different ways you can explain it.
Okay, thank you.
I was referring to the level of understanding that what we call, in other words, if God were to reveal to us his reason, we would not get it. That's the main point. Because it's not in our realm of understanding. That's what he's saying here. It's not like, okay, he's keeping it as a secret to himself. It's a different realm. It's a different reality. It's a reality we just never enter that place.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. There is a section in volume 2, trying to find it, where he literally brings similar words about Rabbi Akiva. I don't see it right now. Anyway, I'm going to stop here at the bottom of page, where are we here? 1239. And then to the parentheses, we're up to almost three, close